In that great getting up morning, fare you well, fare you well. Another spiritual that my father loved was, there is plenty good room in my Father's kingdom. Now, our ancestors, the enslaved Africans who composed that spiritual plenty good room, did so with John 14 in mind. The gospel, the scripture that was just proclaimed, John 14. And that says, in my Father's house, there are many mansions. My father loved French, and he knew that the word mansion was simply a French word that meant dwelling places or rooms. So in my Father's house, there are many dwelling places. In my Father's house, there are many rooms, meaning there is plenty good room in my Father's kingdom. Now, my father, Robert Taylor's life was one full of breaking boxes. My father was born in Louisburg in 1937 on land that his ancestors had lived on since 1790, when this country was just 1 year old. So for nearly 150 years, his ancestors had been on that land in Franklin County when he was born. Now, when he was born, he was so sick that his parents had to take him to the hospital, which was unusual for black people in 1937, because the only black hospital between D.C. and Atlanta was at St. Augustine's University. And it was unusual for black people to take anybody to the hospital. So you know my father had to be critically ill for his parents to take him to the hospital. And when he went to the hospital, the doctor told my dear Grandma Annabelle and Grandpa Sidney, I'm sorry, but your son will not live out of infancy. When his brothers heard that message, they went home and they built a small wooden casket, just enough for his infant body. Now, if you want to talk about breaking boxes, my father broke a box, unless you consider an 84-year-old man an infant. The doctor had checked the box of deceased for Robert Taylor, and he just blew that wide open. Dr. Nathaniel Mackey is an African-American poet and Duke University writing professor, and he uses this phrase, cramped and capacious. Cramped and capacious. That makes no sense because it's an oxymoron. How can a space be cramped but also have plenty good room? Capacious, where do we get capacity from? Both cramped and capacious. How can someone be short and tall at the same time? How can it be loud and quiet at the same time? It makes no sense. But that was this man. Small in stature, but a giant presence that impacted the world. That's right. He rented a room when he was a student at St. Augustine's University in Raleigh. He rented a room from his cousin. And the room had a U-shaped bed. The bed was shaped like a U, and the room was so small that there was not enough space for him to kneel and say his prayers at night. The man had to pray standing up because he couldn't kneel to say his prayers. His first teaching position out of college in Mount Airy, somehow he was able to cram 6 or 7 high school seniors in his small 2-door Chevy car and drove them 3 hours to Raleigh, to the campus of St. Augustine's University. No one had ever encouraged these black students to go to college. People had told them that they couldn't go to college because they weren't smart enough or didn't have enough money, but he said, yes, you do. So we're going to crack into this car and take you to school. And he introduced them to a new horizon because he believed in them and he exposed them to something different. Education was certainly my father's calling. When he graduated from college in Raleigh, both the university president and the chaplain came to him and said, Robert, we want you to be a minister. We want you to be an ordained minister. And during the course of his life, several bishops would call my father and say, won't you consider going into ministry? But my father always said that education was his calling. He was not called to be a priest. He was called to be a teacher. He often told his brother Johnny, who was a special agent in the U.S. Army, you may fight the enemy on the battlefield. I fight the enemy in the classroom, and that enemy is ignorance. There was plenty good room in his classroom because he transformed it from a classroom into a class world. Because his classroom may have been small, but his class world was big. Because in his classroom, you could go from England to France to South Africa to Ethiopia, all in the same class. And he would all have it make sense. His students, during his 50 years of teacher, called him the kindest person in the world, with the abbreviation TKPITW. He broke the boxes of the classroom by being creative, using rap, R&B, blues, and pop music to teach literature. Jesus said in John 14:6, I am the way and the truth and the life. Jesus, by saying that, was letting his disciples know that I, Jesus, am about to go through something. He is about to go through something. And this is what Jesus meant by saying, I am the way. I am about to go through betrayal, a trumped up trial, an execution by being crucified on the cross, and a burial. And God led him through those things through resurrection, breaking the box of his grave. And God even led Jesus through his ascension, where he ascended back to heaven to be with God the Father. And Jesus was trying to open the minds of the disciples to look at a future death, but to look at that future death through the eyes of faith, not despair. He wanted them to keep the faith. My father lived a life where he went through something. Born in a time of segregation and American apartheid, he walked 5 miles a day to school to get an education. He was the first black teacher in Franklin County to integrate schools in 1967 at Bunn, where white students would stand outside of his classroom because he said we refuse to let a Negro teach us. He fought the legacy of white supremacy in the educational system by believing in black students. And he went through medical challenges in the last chapter of his life after being diagnosed with a brain tumor 15 years ago that made him legally blind and disrupting his body function. At Chapel Hill right now, there are more than 1,000 pages and images of my father's brain. The times that he went there to get the medical attention. So Jesus' way, when he said, I am the way, the truth, and the life, Jesus' way was that of betrayal, trial, and execution on the cross, and then the burial. My father's way was that of white supremacy, racism, losing loved ones, and medical health challenges. But just as Jesus' way did not end on the cross, my father's way does not end at this castle. Just as Jesus broke the boxes of the cross and grave, he created plenty good room for all of us. Jesus always taught as he was traveling along the way. When Jesus was hanging on the cross, he said, forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do. The Romans executed, Jesus forgave. My father taught as he traveled his way. He taught equity in the classroom, that race and status do not define you, and they do not mean you can't learn. My father taught the same material, whether it was advanced placement or a regular class. The only difference was the top sheet. When he handed out the syllabus, If it said advanced placement English or general English, what was believed was exactly the same. Because he believed in equity. And just because somebody has called you general does not mean that you can't do what others think is advanced. And when he taught during his medical challenges, and the way he did that was by showing kindness. After his brain surgery in 2006, his tumor started to grow again, so he had to go to UNC for 6 weeks, 5 days a week. He had to go in for radiation every weekday for 6 weeks. The times that I took him, whenever the nurse would lead him back into the waiting room, my father would walk very wobbly because he was blind in one eye. He was barely able to see. He was tired. He was exhausted. But each time I took him, when the nurse would lead him to me, he would look at the nurse, even with his blind eye, and say, "Thank you for your kindness." Life gave him a brain tumor. My father responded with kindness. Robert Taylor may be dead, but he is not finished teaching. Not at all. My father now joins the ancestors, those who have gone before. The book of Hebrews chapter 11 has that great roll call of faithful, beginning with Abel, going to Noah and Abraham and Moses and David. And then we get to the end of chapter 11 and turn the corner to chapter 12 and it says, "Since therefore we are surrounded by such great cloud of witnesses." Then it goes on to say, "Looking to Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith." My father's name is now added to that roll call of ancestors. He has gone to a place where we have not gone before. He now is an ancestor. All of us are ancestors in training. He, the ancestors we left behind, are now ancestors in training. We see this man's death through the eyes of faith, not of despair. Since my father is now a teacher of ancestors, and we are all his students, ancestors in training, what is his lesson plan? He has left so many physical reminders to so many through the letters typed on that old Royal brand typewriter. That style typewriter went out about 40 years ago, right after the word processor and certainly with the computer. But it did not go out of style for my father. He used that typewriter. My two sisters and I received at least one letter a week from him for at least 20 years. That's 3,000 letters just to his 3 children. And I'm sure that some of you have received letters from my father. One day, you will be looking for something. Who knows what it is? And you will come across a letter that my father wrote you. And even though it may have been dated 1990, it doesn't matter. Because the day you read it is the date that's supposed to be on it. That is my father communicating to you through his letter, sending you a message of encouragement and love. You might be at the North Carolina State Fair and you may hear Whitney Houston's song, "The Greatest Love of All," playing at a ride. And you may think about Mr. Taylor, who loved to use that song to teach his students that you first have to love yourself and believe in yourself in order to succeed. And at all of our family birthday party gatherings, when we sing "Happy Birthday to You," someone will have to start with, "He's over the hill, he's over the hill, he's over the hill, he's over the hill." And that would be Robert, the ancestor teaching the ancestors in training about hills. But hills for him were not about his age. Hills for Robert Taylor. I like that Mahalia Jackson song he loved to play on his auto harp, that musical instrument. Just over the hill, coming over the hill. Oh, I can almost see the top of the hill. You know I've come through so many rocks and hills. My soul gets a certain thrill over the hill. I just can't stop till I reach the top, coming over the hill. Not that you're over the hill because of your age, but that you're climbing up to the hill because your soul gets a certain thrill once you made it over the hill. Our Father has made it over the hill. My Father has made it over the hill. Robert Taylor is a husband, father, grandfather, friend, educator, mentor, civil rights advocate, and letter writer. And the word that he ended most of his letters to families were keep the faith and agape love. The greatest legacy that my father leaves is faith and love. And for that, to God be the glory. To that, God be the glory. To that, God be the glory.